Welcome again to Clutching Our Pearls. Today we have what we hope is going to be absolute pleasure, and I'm pretty sure it will be, of speaking to Mr. Jack Kammer about gender issues and the issues of anti-male stereotypes and biases. Jack launched a radio show in 1983 on male-female relationships and the gender issues of men and boys. And let me tell you, back in 83, even though I was but a fetus, men and boys did not have a lot of places to talk about the issues that they were experiencing in gender. It didn't take him long to realize that this is a serious societal problem and that these problems connect to just society's general lack of awareness of gender issues and this anti-male stereotype and a lot of other biases. Jack earned his master's in social work in 2008 and was named Outstanding Resident Graduate at the University of Maryland School for Social Work in 2012. Along the way, his interest in social implications of gender stereotypes and the expectations of boys and men took him to various facilitators and I'm sure lots of educational experiences where he involved the connection between male gender issues and the troubling societal problems for nearly 3 decades. Additionally, along with being a podcast guest as the counter-feminist social worker, he has 2 podcasts of his own, Men Are Talking and Goodwill Toward Men. He's written several books and he's got a lot of other things up his sleeve. We are so thankful to welcome Jack Kammer.
Hello.
Thank you. Hi, Marie and Susie. Thank you so much. That's a real nice introduction.
Well, we try to be nice in the beginning, just to see what happens.
Okay, very good. I will try to live up to expectations. Because if you had said I was a horrible person in the introduction, then, I guess I'd have to live down to those expectations.
Well, I think that we are up for a very interesting conversation because you must know that when somebody sees the word counter-feminist, it invokes a reaction.
Yes, I do.
What can you typically get when people first meet you?
Well, they're afraid for me.
There.
Especially men, they're afraid for me, but they don't need to fear because I'm retired. Nobody can get me fired. I'm not going to be turned down for any promotion that I'm seeking because I'm not looking to get promoted. I'm not vulnerable to having my research funding cut off because I don't have any.
So basically, you got nothing to lose and you're ready for this shit.
I have... I have a little bit to lose. I mean, the truth of the matter is my wife has told me, not much lately, not lately since I've been doing podcasts, and she's listened to a few to get a better idea of, what I'm trying to do. She has expressed that it is somewhat embarrassing for her to have friends who know that she has an anti-feminist husband. Now, I am not an anti-feminist. I am a counter-feminist, and maybe I should...
Can you tell me what each of those means to you so that I can understand?
Yes. An anti-feminist says no. Listens to women talk about feminist issues and says no. It's a bunch of baloney. You don't hear many anti-feminists these days, but back in the day, all women are on a pedestal. Women, women are privileged. Women don't have any real issues to concern us with. That's an anti-feminist. Somebody who says no. A counter-feminist says yes, and women have issues, and yes, and men have issues too. I like to say that the most sexist idea in the world is the idea that only one sex is ever sexist, and only one sex is ever harmed by sexism.
I 100% agree with that.
Yeah.
So
now, you are open-minded. You're podcasters, and podcasters are wonderfully open-minded. I mean, that's why we do podcasts, because we want to hear points of view that we haven't heard before. But, the average Joe or the average Josephine will, sometimes take umbrage at the suggestion, are you saying women are sexist? Well, yeah. We've been saying for 60 years that men are sexist. We're human. Of course we fall prey to that.
Marie, what were you going to say?
So I love your description of that because it almost feels like you were a anti-feminist that went to an improv class and thought, yes, And
Yes, and well, I have taken an improv class, yes, and I do know about yes and. But no, I don't think I was ever an anti-feminist. I mean, I was disappointed with what feminism, in my view, where it has taken wrong turns and gone off the tracks. But I was pretty happy to hear about equality between the sexes. I mean, I can go way back in my life to thinking about how I didn't really think that the male lot was a great privilege. And if somebody was interested in loosening that up for me, I was all for it. And if that was done in concordance with loosening up things for women, that's fine with me too. I mean, I could tell you, do you want me to tell you the first thing I remember about gender?
I would love to.
Okay. All right. So you know how it is, not so much anymore because everybody's learned the problem. But back in the day, it was much more common for little girls.
Decade?
Well, I'm talking 60s.
Okay, thank you.
That's back in my day.
All right.
Back in that day, it was not a good thing to say to a little girl who was good at sports, "Gee, you're really good at sports," for a girl. And it was not a good thing back in the day to say to a little girl who was good at math, "Gee, you're really good at math," for a girl. What I used to hear back in that day was, "Gee, Jack, you're really good with babies," for a boy. And I thought, what is that about? What's the message there?
Right.
And I thought it was probably somewhat shaming or telling me I was a little unusual, maybe weird.
Or assuming incompetence or disinterest.
Yeah. Like, boys are supposed to be competent at these other things. What are you doing, developing these interests and abilities that you have? So that's where it goes for me. And that really sort of opens up a door to, everything that I'm about. I started the social work consultancy once I got out of social work school. It never got any business. My tagline was tools and training for the social work profession to help men give and get all the love they can. Because there are a lot of barriers for men, giving and getting love with equal bandwidth to the way women can give and get love. We have advantages, if you think of them as an advantage. We have an advantage in getting jobs and making money. If you're not really terribly interested in, being a CEO and making a lot of money, but you're much more interested in human relationships and nurturing and being fun with kids and helping them grow up happy and healthy, I didn't have an advantage there. That's what I wanted.
Mr. Rogers or like Trump before he was as Trumpy as he got.
Yeah. And so, you had two extremes. And if you were going to go to the Mr. Rogers extreme, you were subject to a lot of scrutiny, skepticism, suspicion, doubt.
Emasculation.
And epithets. Yeah.
And so we, of course, have had a couple of conversations because if we're going to bring on somebody who is going to talk about feminism with us, we want to make sure you're not out of your damn mind. It's just a general check. And you brought up
That's still an open question, by the way.
We'll see how the show goes.
I didn't write that in my report.
So we have all of these constructs of gender identity and how societally we're all supposed to show up. And Susie and I, and Susie, please speak for yourself because I think you're much older than I am.
Like hardly older.
But, we grew up in a space where we'd watched women fight and fight and fight. And we've watched women fight against themselves. One of the hardest things for me to wrap my mind around was seeing what was happening in the legal industry with the women that had paved the way and the young women that were coming behind them, and how they felt like they need to make them pay their dues because they had already had to fight this hard. And all of these different constructs started to create a struggle for a notion of superiority, right? Where you took your own perception of what was the superior sex into whatever situation you were walking into, which at this point, I think we can kind of call bullshit on that whole game because we're all out here just trying to survive the world that we were handed. But there was definitely a space where the notion of female superiority became everything, because all of a sudden we were doing it all, we were having it all. There were shoulder pads and really uncomfortable pantyhose, but man, we could birth those babies and then get right back to work. Lucky us. When you tear apart those constructs through your filter, how does the notion of female superiority sit for you?
Well, I often like to use the mirror and talk about 50, 60 years ago and how the construct of male superiority showed up for women. The concept of male superiority was, in my view, not accidentally, but through a million iterations, finely tuned for serving to justify keeping women out of the male domain. Women cry too much. Women can't do math. Women can't make tough decisions. They just want everybody to like them. Blah, 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 blah. They're not logical. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Name your stereotype, a bazillion of them. So we've spent 30, 40, 50, 60 years working to overcome those stereotypes. We need to do the same for the stereotypes that still operate against men, and in my view, are finely tuned to keep men out of the female domain. So I'll stop there unless you want me to continue into what I think the female domain is.
I think that's an anchor that we need to make for this audience, because there's a lot of, a lot of pretty girly things to do, like, pushing out kids. That's specifically girly for some people, if you're lucky.
What I do for every girls' night out.
Right? It's what we live for. Such a great time.
Recreational childbirth.
Oh, I wish the recreation did not result in procreation. That would make things a lot less heavy.
I'm sorry, you were saying?
Okay, now look, it's interesting there. This is also part of the construct, I think, that when we talk about the female domain, I understand it was in jest and in joking, but you immediately talk about the negative aspects of it.
Well, okay. Tell me, what is the female domain and what are the positive and negative aspects of it? Because you're coming from a point of view that I do not have.
Okay.
And so I would like to understand it.
So just like the little girl who was good at math wanted to get into the male domain where being math was valued and was celebrated and was rewarded and was honored and cherished and congratulated and respected, men like me, and I think there's a lot more of us than, dare to stick our heads up out of the foxhole. We want access to the female domain, which is the domain of relationships and nurturance and expression and emotions and being who you are and not worrying about so much what you do, but being who you are. And that, to me, is the female domain in a nutshell. Now, we don't really know or think about the female domain because we think of power as being vertical. Maybe even we should say phallic. We think of the male power structure as a tall pyramid, a tall structure. You can think of it as a triangle, as a pyramid. You can think of it as an office building where all the big executives are, up in the C-suite. And I get that. And our eyes, as we stand and look at this power structure, our eyes just are inexorably drawn to the top. And we look up and we say, wow, that is so big. That is so amazing. Oh, and look, it's all men up there. That's not fair. There is another kind of big. It is a fair question to ask, what kind of a building is bigger? A skyscraper that might have 100 floors or a convention center that might only have 3 floors, each of which covers 18 acres? Which is a bigger building? Well, it sort of depends. What do you want to do in that building? If you want to run a corporation, run a business, make money, then okay, that office building's probably pretty well set up for that. If you want to work with people, collaborate with people, talk with people, listen to people, get new ideas, move things forward, have friendships, form coalitions, then, the convention center is probably better for that, so that you don't have to jump on and off the elevator in the office building when you want to talk to somebody. Everybody's right there. It's relationship oriented. And at the top of the male pyramid is the dollar sign, or sometimes I think of it as a lightning bolt, sort of external power that men are sort of pushed towards trying to get. To me, the female symbol of power is not a dollar sign, it's not a lightning bolt, and it's not at the top of anything because it's not vertical, it's lateral. So I see it as
shaped, because the male power was phallic. Is the female power like yonic?
Well, did you say U-shaped?
No, I said yoni.
Okay, I'm not sure what yoni means. I see
it's the opposite of phallus.
Okay. Yes. Well, then very good. I don't really see it as
Phallus
the opposite.
in Latin, the opposite of that is yoni. So there's phallic and there's yonic.
Okay. And so we're talking about a vagina, basically?
Well, a vulva.
Okay. So a place into which something goes.
Not mine.
Or a place from which something comes. Is that
Depends
what we're talking about?
I think
No, well, you were saying that the male power structure is vertical and yonic. So
No, vertical and phallic.
I'm sorry, vertical and phallic. Okay.
Yeah.
so. If
I
we're
was kind of just trying to make a joke, but I think it's
Oh, okay.
looking
All
at
right.
the juxtaposition, though, I think that, when you, and I'm going to go here because it's that kind of podcast. The yoni is something that is very differently shaped, and it is
Yes, absolutely.
much flatter in structure, and
Yes.
has the ability to expand and not just grow in one direction.
Yes, and to embrace. And so the way I see the female power structure is as a group of concentric circles. There is no top, there is no hierarchy, there is no up, there is a center. And at the center of the female power structure is not a dollar sign or a lightning bolt, but a big red heart. That's what it looks like to me. And children are very much aligned with that big red heart, or they're very much connected to that big red heart. But it's not just about children. It's about your friends and your relatives and your relationships and yourself, loving yourself, respecting how you feel about things, which men are often not encouraged to do. Well, if you feel sad, there must be something wrong with you. If you feel angry, there must be something wrong with you. If you feel afraid, well, there's certainly something wrong with you, buddy, because men are never afraid of anything.
So who do you think, who
You want to talk about blame here, don't you? Who do I blame? Is that what you wanted to ask? I don't want to blame anybody.
No, I didn't want to ask you that at all, but
Okay.
that was interesting.
Yeah.
What I wanted to ask is, how do you think those power structures are maintained? And why do you think those power structures are maintained?
Okay, so that's kind of close to why is this happening and who's responsible?
Which is not blame. If a structure is created and maintained, it's for a reason.
Okay, so who benefits from this?
No, that's not what I asked you. I said, why do you think those?
I think it's because somebody benefits from it.
Okay, who?
Okay, well, back in the day, men benefited from exclusive access to the male domain. Over the past 40, 50, 60 years, we've done a pretty good job of opening up access to that domain to women. I'm not saying it's equal, but we've done a pretty good job of opening that up. We've done a pretty good job of dismantling the stereotypes that serve to justify keeping women out. We need to do the same for the female power structure. I will admit that it was men who benefited largely from maintaining the male power structure for men. And I don't think it's really asking too much to ask women to examine whether or not they benefit in any ways from maintaining the female power structure for women. And I would suggest actually that it's going to be even harder for women to acknowledge that and be open to changing that than it was for men. And God knows it was hard for men. Should I go?
My question here is, we had to fight and change laws to try to start getting equality. So because men created those laws and created a straight structure that validated those domains, we had to go in and attack the legal system so that we could try to get any kind of equal power, vote, representation. Women could vote in revolutionary America once the Constitution was passed. Actually, it might have been John Adams who gendered constitutions. Actually, no, that's a lie. It was John Adams who stopped a lot of women from voting. And then white women got the vote in 1920, whatever. And Native American women didn't get it until 10, 20 years later, Black women and Southeast Asian, 1965. And so that's a legal change we have to make. And then the legal change enforces the social change. So how would the female power structure be changed?
So that gets to the idea I was making about how it's going to be even more difficult for women to open up their domain to men than it was for men to open up their domain to women.
The men were forced to, and there was a path using the law. What is the path for women to do this, according to you? I mean, are you just saying we have to open up our hearts, or are you saying we have to change power structures?
I'm saying both, because the heart is at the center of the power structure.
That is false, in my opinion, because it was not heart that built a country that was stolen and from Native Americans. That wasn't heart. That was commerce.
So then I would have to ask, did women benefit in any way from the commerce that men were engaged in?
By sheer survival.
Yeah, women weren't allowed to own property or have bank accounts, which was how the state enforced heterosexuality and the male power structure. That's what the law was. For women who were widowed or women who were queer or women who didn't want to be with men or couldn't couple with a man, even if they, if they chose to, or if they desired to, they didn't have those legal and financial protections. So a system was created. People had to figure out how to survive within that system.
So I have a 2-word response.
Okay.
Yes, yes, and.
Okay.
You are telling us, because you have become very aware of the ways in which sexism operates against women. I am here to talk about the ways in which sexism operates against men. They're not mutually exclusive.
Understood. But what I'm trying to communicate is that one is and was state enforced, and the other one is not, except for, I would say, in cases of divorce and custody, where because there was the domestic state enforced domain of womanhood, then the child automatically goes to the woman. I have a brother-in-law in Ohio who's really struggling with that right now.
Yes, yes. Does the fact that something is state enforced make it more important than something that is deeply, deeply, deeply enmeshed in the culture?
I think
it's a manifestation of that infestation, that it was available to be put into a legal system, and that it was reinforced over and over and over again by those that were at the top of the power construct. Whereas when you're looking at the female power system, yes, there are places where we absolutely have a perceived domain. And I am in no way saying that, every woman is a great mom, or it just doesn't work that way. Humans is humans, and they all come in their own shapes and iterations with their own stories and programming. But there is a difference of having to fight against those that are in power, that can set actual legally binding scenarios, versus a set of perceptions that can be changed, and can be changed quickly. And I think that's part of how women and the gay community very easily brought themselves together, because we didn't quite have those boundaries set up in such defined and societally sanctioned
forced. Yeah.
Why do you think it is that men haven't come together? We talk about the patriarchy. In my view, the principal problem with patriarchy is that the last thing patriarchal men can talk about is their own issues.
So when you say their own issues, are you talking about things like emotion or desire to be other than what that was predicted?
Everything. Whatever it is that would enhance their lives, that's not what they're there in the patriarchy to accomplish. Yes, the patriarchy can be patriarchal. It can be paternalistic. But the patriarchy's primary function is not to take care of men. It's to use men to help take care of the community, which largely gets down in the crunch to women and children.
So one of my favorite early 1900s politicians, she was a suffragette, and she used to say that they want us to birth more sons so that those sons can be used up on battlefields and factories. And she was saying that women, I want to tie these two concepts together, but I don't think we have time today. But she was saying that economically, it's not right that men are disposable. And I believe and have seen that in a patriarchal system, men hold power and provide. In a patriarchal system, women are supposed to maintain the domestic space and take care of the children so that the man has the ability to go out and provide more. And that is highly exploitive. The patriarchy is highly exploitive of men in that way, and highly exploitive of women in that way. The patriarchal system is built for capitalism.
Well, there are patriarchal systems in countries that are not capitalist. I mean,
Yes.
I understand what you're saying, but it really gets down to, in my view, it's not a matter of capitalism versus other forms of economics. It gets down to the need that we all have had since we were a band of hominids walking across the grasslands of Africa. We need stuff, including intangible stuff like security, safety. And it was largely, but not exclusively, because women were also making stuff, but it was men's value was largely measured by how well they were, quote unquote, being the provider, which is pretty limiting.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And I think that we're all on the same page that anyone who is being forced to function within a set of parameters that means that they have to turn off a part of who they are intrinsically in order to exist within that society or within that society is bullshit. And we need to start calling bullshit on it.
Okay, I don't want to say bullshit, but I do want to call something out here.
Sure.
Because I was attempting to describe my view of the female power structure. And we've spent the past 10 minutes talking about the male power structure because we are very reluctant to talk about the female power structure.
I tried to get you to explain it. So I will so please explain it. Thank you for saying that. Please explain.
Okay. So if you think about the male power structure, it's hierarchical. You can think of it as a triangle, as a pyramid. You can think of it as one huge organizational chart with maybe one or some very few people at the top. And the farther you go down, the more and more and more and more and more and more and more people, in the case of it being a male power structure, more and more men at the bottom without very much power. And of course, most men are sort of not at the bottom, not at the top, but they have a lot of layers above them and maybe some layers below them. They always have a boss. There's always somebody above them in the power structure, in the organizational chart. What I want to suggest is that the female power structure is not hierarchical. It is lateral. And the way I see it is concentric circles of many, 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 many one-layer hierarchies, so that every woman, not every woman, but many women, for the most part, it's largely available, or at least the woman who wants to be in this position has at least a good chance of achieving it. She's certainly not discouraged from pursuing it. A one-level hierarchy with the mother at the top and the children below. And if you ask me, where do I see the father in the female domain? I see him as a dotted line to the mother, almost as if he's a vendor. And the reason I think it's going to be really difficult for women to acknowledge that this is going on is because they get to be the queens of their little domain. It's not a hugely powerful domain in the way that a CEO of a Fortune 500 company has power, or the president of the United States has power. But very few men have that much power. Most men have very little power. And so a lot of women are very happy that they get to have a modicum of power. Power to feel good about themselves, to feel happy, to have relationships with their kids. They get to express how nurturing they are. And it's not a bazillion dollars that you have a 1 in a bazillion chance of getting. It's $100 that you got a 99.9% chance of getting. And we sort of push men to say, forget about this thing, go chase the star. And a lot of men fall short, and they live lives of quiet desperation, as the poet said. Not willing to admit that they failed or that they're losers in this game that shouldn't be defined that way. But it's the way a lot of men, I think, feel, and they look. And in the 60s and 70s and 80s, when women said, hey, we want a fair share of what you got, there were men who were saying, well, that's fine. You can come over here and be a bricklayer, and, because my boss is a real asshole, and I'll let him beat on you for a while. But I'd really like to spend more time with our kids. Could we arrange that? And, as I talked about how the stereotypes are finely tuned, we're finely tuned to keep women out of the male power structure. The stereotypes against men are finely tuned to keep men out of the female power structure. What are those stereotypes that are most effective at making men ineligible for equal citizenship in the female power structure? Men are violent. Men are violent. And then on top of that, men are not nurturing. They just want to have sex. They just want to drink beer and watch football. And they're impatient and they're rude and crude. And men can't multitask and all of that stuff that not only, in my view, has not been cranked down over the past 30, 40, 50, 60 years, but has actually been amplified. That's the way I see it.
When it comes to pieces like, right now, the percentage of men that are stay-at-home fathers, one of the things that I'm really working with right now is how we structure the mental weight that we all carry within the family construct, right? It's typically supposed that the man is to get out there and worry about finances and bringing them in, but then the woman takes care of everything else, including what amount of that finance she's allotted to do with in her domain if she is not somebody who is creating an income of her own. And there's an inequality that is so deeply rooted that we know that, yes, it absolutely can create the impression that men are only good for one thing. And I don't think at any point in our history of clutching our pearls have we looked at masculinity that way, that they are meant to be out there and be earners and to bring it home and do the things. But I can also say that in the experiences that I've seen over my 20 years of being a business owner, working within women's businesses, which I actually made a concerted effort to get out of because it was capping my earning capability by being seen as a women's speaker or a women's business coach. I want so badly to be able to subscribe to this hard and fast vision, but in experience, I see much more of an outcry toward, please help me share this burden. Please, yes. If I am the better earner and you want me to go out and work, if you can stay home, you might be the better person for that.
Can I pick that up for you and help make the vision of this easier to accept?
Can she just finish? I'd love to let her finish what she was saying, and then if you could go, I'd like to hear her full point.
I'm sorry, Marie. Did I cut you off, or were you sort of running out of?
No,
it sounded like you were.
No, you cut her off.
Wall.
I have a pretty clear vision of.
I wanted to mansplain.
We know. Okay. It's okay.
Go ahead.
What I have seen is that, especially in the Gen Y, Gen Millennial, and coming up into Gen Z experiences, that we have uniquely made space for alternative family structures, including those of LGBT, interracial couples that have a different power construct in the home, and that those boundaries came down faster than I saw any law crumble, than I saw any masculine shift towards creating and opening paths for women in business, even up into the point that as a business owner since the age of 22, I was missing major parts of my career and my earning opportunity because I was female and because I did uniquely know how to work with people of many different backgrounds. And the truth was, I was the one they didn't see coming, because when you see 5-foot blonde of me walk into a room, you don't expect me to be able to dress down the CEO of a Fortune 500 company and make a sale that's going to change the course of an entire industry. But that's exactly what the hell I do. So if we're to take it at this point of view that there is a intrinsic value that the feminine society holds to maintaining the constructs of superiority or a feminine hierarchical system, there's not a place that I can find a hook in that I find truth. And that's the thing, is I've been trying in listening to you is to find that hook. But from the things that I see, experience, research, and watch on a continuum, because we're all on a continuum and we know that the pendulum swings one way and then it swings back the other way really hard. And then somehow eventually we end up in some kind of joint misery. But it took so much longer for us to swing the pendulum, and it's never swung back as far the other way. But I don't think we're the ones that are keeping it from swinging back. And now I've made my point.
So you have been a business owner since you were 22. You are a person who is very interested in taking advantage of the male domain or getting your equal share of what was previously the male domain.
I'm interested in participating in the business domain, male or female.
Domain gendered for you. Because I
It
don't think
was
Marie
it
sees
was
that domain in a gendered way. Do you?
previously the male domain. You want equal access to that. I would suggest to you that your view of womanhood is colored by working with women who need help being in both places at once. And I would suggest to you that there are a lot of women who do not have fabulous and interesting entrepreneurial skills or entrepreneurial ideas, and they are not businesswomen, and they don't want to be businesswomen. They are quite happy being in the female domain, being the queen of their little queendom.
I got to tell you, Jack, in all of my years of being a mom, the word queen never came into my fucking head.
Well,
Like
that's probably, that might have something to do with the fact that since you were 22, you've been working with women who were not interested in being queens in the female domain.
I don't know any woman who talks like that or thinks like that. And so, like what Marie said, I'm really trying to hear you and understand you and connect with what you're saying and find the commonalities. But one of the things that I've noticed when we're talking about, a blanket statement about women in their domain and men in their domain, when you say, I don't see things that way, well, you're an exception. Well, you're an exception. Well, you're an exception. And I think there is nobody, and Marie and I have massive networks of friends and colleagues and such. And I just don't know any woman who is like, I want this, I want to be the queen of my domain. I don't see women seeing it that way. So I'm struggling.
Okay, so let me ask you this. In a divorce involving children, what should be the outcome for parental relationships?
Both parents should have the opportunity and the responsibility of fostering effective and healthy relationships for that child and for one another.
Good. And in how many states is that the case?
That varies from family to family.
No, it varies from state to state because we're talking about state laws here. We're talking about state divorce laws. Do you know the idea of a rebuttable presumption for joint custody?
Oh, I've never been in a custody dispute.
Okay. So a rebuttable presumption for joint custody says that when there's a divorce involving children, the starting point is the parents are divorcing each other. Neither of them is divorcing their children, and the children are certainly not divorcing either parent. Mm-hmm. And so, unless we got information about something else going on, we're going to have equal parenting following divorce. Now, you would think that women who are looking for help from men in the nurturing sphere would be out there real strong to establish a rebuttable presumption for joint custody in every state in the union. What we hear in state legislatures where this is being considered, proposed by people like me who are doing what women had to do 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago, we have to fight, but we have to fight in a nice way. What we hear is, oh, no, that's forced joint custody. And we really should take every case step by step, individually. Can't have any blanket rules. So what we hear is that this forced joint custody endangers women and children. That's what you'll hear in the state legislatures. The stereotype of the violent man. Now, we all are very comfortable with the idea of rebuttable presumptions in court. Our whole criminal system is based on a rebuttable presumption of innocence, which means you are innocent until proven guilty. If the state wants to take away somebody's liberty or something valuable that they love and care about, lock them up, put them in prison. If the state wants to do that, it's got some work to do. Prove that this is just and fair and right and good for our society. A rebuttable presumption of joint custody is the same way. If you want to take my kids away from me and reduce me to a visitor, I need to know why. And our society needs to know why.
Can I
pose? I don't see the women's movement saying we absolutely should have equality here. I don't know how much time we have, but I would like to read a little bit of something.
I'd like to ask you a question before you read a passage. Okay. Is it possible that because of the patriarchal masculine slant on being the provider that the system has almost set itself up to fail? Because if he is not able to be a caregiver for that child because of circumstance, time, travel, etc., that in my experience, and I have been through a divorce, is what dictated how the child was cared for because of the person's ability to physically be there to care. And a big part of what we agreed upon was that we would do everything possible to facilitate visitation and provide extra time when and if at all possible, that we would not disparage the other person, which is possibly the most toxic thing you can do to your child. And that as much, while we did not want to parent at the same time, basically, you're great, now go away, that we would do our very best to make sure that those opportunities were there. But I can't subscribe to the fact that it's a feminist win, that we are the ones that are quite often the caregivers, because now we are also in households where there's no alimony and child support is a percentage, and we know it's not enough to live on. Now the female caregiver who may have had more flexibility in the past is put into a position where she has to go earn additional income and is now shouldering 2 to 3 times the weight of that same parental experience. And nurturing is different than ensuring the safety and well-being of the child. I would much rather be able to have the time to be in a space where I could nurture my child, as opposed to putting in the kinds of hours that I have to put in order to keep our heads above water. So now we've got the children, we've got less of a stability, and we're still making less income on the dollar. What are we at, right? 72 cents now, 79 cents. So we're working just as hard, making less money, also shouldering the brunt of the child rearing experience.
And now you're homeschooling again, right?
I don't even want to talk about it right now. That also, and the way that the laws are constructed is that the father has the opportunity to see that child, but not the obligation. So the child must be available, but they're not obligated to do any part of that nurturing or rearing, which again is a personal choice.
So a rebuttable presumption for joint custody would establish not necessarily 50-50 time in every case, but would establish the dignity and the right of both parents to have a say in how this divorcing couple, will work things out, rather than you are a visitor, you are non-custodial, I make the decisions here. There's also a little bit of what I'm hearing in you is a little bit of a belief that, men really are not really equal to the task as women are of nurturing. Men will nurture differently.
I didn't say that at all.
Well, I perceived it.
You're wrong.
It sounded like it.
You're incorrect, because I'll let her speak first.
That's all right.
We want that nurturing to happen from both parents, because there's value in them learning how to be loved in different ways.
Yes.
Trust me, being the whole show does not make you the queen of anything. It makes you one stressed out, tired broad is what it makes you.
But you do get to make things happen the way you want them to. If you don't have somebody you have to be a partner with, you do get to call the shots.
What exciting, fun shots am I calling?
How to raise the kids.
Isn't he getting to call the same shots when that child is with him?
If he's a non-custodial parent and merely a visitor, he doesn't get to say where the kid's going to school.
She's talking about her situation.
Oh, well, I'm not talking about your situation, Marie. I know nothing about your situation,
even,
and this really shouldn't be personalized.
She's
about hundreds of millions.
Well, so, I'm not talking about my situation in general, I want to make sure that, because Jack, it's not me against you. That's not how we started out, and that's not where we're going to end up. But if you are responsible for getting that kid back and forth to school, and you are now balancing that with a job and a different lifestyle and all of those things, there's got to be some kind of flexibility to where the person who physically has the child can make a life that works on some level.
Well, they both would physically have the child equal amounts of time if that's what they decide is best.
Which I think is pretty much how the at least the laws in Illinois are set up.
Well, I do know that that there are many ways for women to tap stereotypes about men if they wish to not be fair in a divorce.
But that makes That makes
Go
a
ahead.
presumption that the female part of that equation is intending unfairness or poor impacts on that child because of spite or some other issue that she's dealing with.
I think that when it comes to the impact on the child, she's rationalizing that, and her primary concern, the primary impact that she doesn't really care about, that she knows about and doesn't care about, is the impact, the unfairness to the man, because she's the mother. You know, you hear that. I'm the mother. I'm the mother. That's an assertion in very few words of superiority. I'm the mother.
So superiority of what?
Ability, right, what should happen, who should be able to call the shots, who should be respected more than the other. I'm the mother.
Okay.
Jack, I really hope that wasn't your experience, because it sounds like it was painful.
No,
That happened to you?
This is not about my experience. I don't have any kids. I've never been divorced, but I see it happening. I used to be a parole and probation agent in central Baltimore. And if you want to talk about a community in which not every person has a job, not every person has a career, not every person has an entrepreneurial spirit or entrepreneurial opportunity. I'm talking about situations where a lot of men and women just have jobs. They just have jobs with somebody bossing them around. And in those communities, in communities that are not populated by women who have been business women since they were 22, there is a lot of, the reality for a lot of folks is, I got a job and I hate it. And I got a lousy boss and I can't wait to get home. And what I'm suggesting to you is that a lot of men don't have anybody to go home to. I would like to sort of end this on a positive note, which is it's could be 4 paragraphs. I'd be satisfied just with reading you 2.
Can I ask you a question first?
Okay.
I'm confused about the premise of your last statement, because you said a lot of men don't have people to come home to. What is the fixable thing about that?
That men have equal respect, equal opportunity, equal protection in maintaining their relationships with their children. And
So you're saying they go home to a house without the wife and children that they used to have, and that are you talking about they're alienated and they're coming home
And there's no
to an empty house?
I'm talking about men being told that they aren't worth anything if they don't have a job.
Yeah, that's a terrible thing.
Yeah. And
That's harmful and exploitive and terrible.
Yes, yes. And it's happening to many, many men at the most distressed margins of our communities.
Absolutely. In the like almost every issue in this country, it is harder if you're in poverty.
And this is an aspect of the harmfulness and the despair of poverty that doesn't get talked much about.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I came from a blue collar family myself. I was born in Flint, and my parents both worked at GM. And my dad's, to the day he died, thought I would make a super fine union secretary. I had to rebel against something. So really knowing intrinsically that poverty is detrimental to human relationships simply because of the external stressors that are there. Those stressors are there whether or not we put the onus on the man to go out and be the breadwinner. And I think more and more often, one, we simply aren't experiencing families that can even come close to survival unless both of them are working, right? That's just not a thing. And so there is a duplicity, just as there is with men and women, as to in this scenario where we are making the assumptions that, one, people want the same things from relationships now that they used to. 2, that there's a muting of an individual, because if you look back across history, women were silenced at a highly disproportionate number, but that we are in a space and time where we can create and should be dedicated as a society to creating something that is better, that is equitable, and that is truly connected to not just what's best for me now, but what's best for us in the long run. And it's going to take a lot of listening on both sides. And figuring out that communication is always going to be the heart of it, because there is no heart if we can't see each other and if we can't hear each other. There's a lot of work to do, Mr. Kammer. And I think that if there's one thing, and I want to make sure that I take the paragraphs that you were going to cite, and I want to put those in the show notes. I want to make sure people can find some of the pieces that you've lived through and worked through, and that you are using in your studies and as the foundation of how you're changing the world. But to me, the common note here is that in creating any kind of opposition in our relationships with one another that is held as a power construct, we are doing ourselves, our children, and our futures a massive disservice. Does that resonate?
So are you saying that feminism did us a massive disservice by talking about male power and its inequitable distribution? That we set up a power construct?
Explain that a little better.
Excuse me?
Can you explain what you mean a little bit better?
Well, Marie, didn't you say that anytime we set ourselves up with a discussion of a power construct, we do ourselves and our families a disservice? And I'm asking, was it a disservice for the feminist movement to talk about the inequitable distribution of power in the male domain?
No, we simply had to talk about it because it was killing us.
Okay, and I would like to say that the female power structure is, and it has power, and we need to talk about it.
We're saying the same thing.
Huh?
We're saying the same thing.
Okay, I thought I heard you say we shouldn't talk about a power construct.
No,
because that's what I want to talk about as a power construct.
That's all we talk about.
I want to talk about the female power structure, which is, very difficult to talk about.
Jack, first of all, I want to say thank you, because it is not a comfortable thing to talk about. And it is certainly not a comfortable thing to walk onto a show about diversity and bring up ideas that may be unpopular at first blush. But I really do believe that at our core, even though we may have different words and experiences that we're using, what we are talking about is creating a more equitable society that does not attach shame or power to a supposed role in this world. Is that something that aligns for you?
Well, I don't think we should run away from power. I mean, it depends on how you use your power.
I think we should degender it altogether. I don't think gender roles are necessary in the power realm whatsoever. I think power is important, and the use and misuse of power, people need to be held accountable for. But I don't think it belongs in the realm of gender whatsoever.
That's a great point.
Well, I think that if we look at the history of gender relations, and if we look at the history of feminism, and if we look at the much shorter history of the men's movement, it is about, certainly feminism talked about male power.
Absolutely.
And so it was gendered because power is gendered. Certainly was gendered much more than it is today, because the former male type of power is much less exclusively male. And my whole discussion is about the need to accomplish the same wonderful task for the female power structure.
And for those of you that want to find out more and want to learn more about Jack's work, I highly, highly encourage you to do it. You can find him at malefriendlymedia.com. And on LinkedIn, he is simply Jack K. You can follow him at Jack Kammer. That's Kammer, and find him on his various social media outlets. I have to say, your podcast has been fascinating for me to listen to, and I came into it with trepidation. But there is a very graceful way that you attempt to talk about very hard issues. And while everyone deserves power, And Forward Revolution, our nonprofit, is firmly based on the fact that people should have money and choices, because that is what creates power. And it is simply something they should have. We should not have to empower people and have them wait to step into their power. The more we know about our choices, and the more we can make sure that there is financial security for as many people as possible, the more of an equitable world we're going to be able to create together. But it is going to take all of us together. And that, to me, no matter what your gender, background, preference, or the skin you came in feels like, is a beautiful place to start from, to embrace, and to grow forward from. And this world's got a lot of growing to do. We screwed things up for very many years. It's not going to be perfect overnight, but there is a chance at happiness, especially if we can learn to listen to one another and share the power. So Jack, I want to thank you so much for showing up today the way that you did, and for answering the questions that we lobbed at you, and for being honest and open and transparent. Susie, thank you so much for not only the incredible perspective that you give, but the passion that you have for how power is applied, especially in the political realm, and how it is leveraged as a construct to suppress or uplift different parts of society. And I'm going to thank myself just because I wanted to be thanked, and it felt super weird to be the last one on the call. Guys, we all have a world to change. We can build it the way that we want to see it, but we have to come together. There has to be a moment of alignment and understanding, and it's something that we get to practice over and over again. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Clutching Our Pearls. I'm sure you clutched yours a couple of times during this conversation. Please get out there and continue to learn, continue to grow, and continue to support one another.
Clutching Our Pearls is a no-holds-barred conversation about women, work, and the world. We strive to approach economic, social, professional, and cultural topics from an open-hearted, good-faith, intersectional feminism point of view. What started as a single mom and business owner's reaction to the coronavirus pandemic continues as a mission to change how work works so that the people have choices. Learn more at fwdrevolution.com. If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a phenomenal review on the platform you use. Talk to you next time.